gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky.
Well, thank the chairman. I find it wonderful that a Democrat is lauding the achievements of Richard Nixon. But I disagree with his characterization that these are bedrock environmental laws. I would compare them to beach sand, where they shift every time there's an administration. There's a sandbar here, and then there's a sandbar there. Or maybe magma instead of bedrock, because they just keep growing and destroying every industry in its path and creating harm. So I would disagree that these are bedrock environmental laws. In fact, if the people who voted for the EPA or the Clean Water Act or the Clean Air Act could see what would become of their law, I think they would have second thoughts on doing it. But, you know, I'm generally not a fan of bills that have 18 bills inside of them. I got to say that. I'd honestly prefer to vote on these individually. But they all seek to solve one problem. And so I appreciate that, and I think they do belong together. And the problem is the problem that the Democrats ignored, and it's actually led to us getting the majority. I mean, back home before the election, the one thing that people cared about the most, and it's somewhat of a cliche, but it's also quite true, the price of gasoline, particularly in rural America where people have to drive to work. In rural America where we're raising the food and creating the energy, but oftentimes have to leave that area to get to work every day or drive long distances because people don't want these things in the city, the energy that they use. They'd rather not have it in their backyard. So it's in rural areas, and we have to buy energy, more of it, to actually get to work. So we're sitting here today, in large part, in the majority, because the minority, when they were in the majority, ignored the basic fundamental question of what are you doing to lower energy prices. The government produces a measure of inflation that I always chuckle at when I see it. It says the rate of inflation independent of food, housing, or energy. I have no idea why they published that, because I don't know a single person that could go, or family that could go without any of those. Everybody needs food, housing, and energy. In fact, when you raise the price of those things artificially or unnecessarily, it's so regressive. I mean, we recognize that it's regressive. That's why there's a SNAP program for food. That's why there's HUD for housing. That's why there's LIHEAP for energy, because we've done so many things to raise the price, and everybody needs a certain amount of all three of those elements to keep their family warm and dry and fed, that it just doesn't make sense, the things that government has done. So I would say if the other side of the aisle had spent less time focused on January 6th and more time on solving this problem, we wouldn't be in the majority. This bill wouldn't even be coming to the floor. Elections have consequences. So just as an example of this, I wish I could play a video in here, but I understand we have different rules in the Rules Committee. We can't have props. I've thought about playing it on the microphone because I was pretty sure I could get away with it, but for at least once. But instead, I'll have to subject you to me reading the transcript of this. Secretary of Energy Granholm was asked, and I think we all remember this. I'm sure all the Democrats winced, and the Republicans laughed or grimaced when they heard her answer. She was, in relation to rising gas prices, when they were $2.89 and going up, she was asked on TV, what is the Granholm plan to increase oil production in America? Her answer was to laugh hysterically for several seconds and then say, that is hilarious. If I had a magic wand, you know, oil is a global market. It's controlled by a cartel. That cartel is called OPEC. And they did make a decision yesterday that they were not going to increase beyond what they were already planning. So, you know, the interesting thing is the Department of Energy has an energy information agency. That agency does the forecasting of what oil and gas prices are going to be as of right now. Their forecast for the beginning of December is that on average gas prices will be about $3 and 5 at the beginning of December. So she was actually able to forecast it. This is one of those few times when you can go back and find out that somebody in government could see what was going to happen. But she committed the same crime twice. The crime is candor. In Washington, D.C., you can be convicted for candor. Candor is saying the truth. Like, nobody in Washington, D.C. is supposed to say the truth. But she said something that's true. She said they don't have a plan. She didn't have a plan. She also said that the price was going to go up. And that's a problem when you admit to those two things, that you don't have a plan and that the price is going to go up. Oh, and that we're dependent on foreign production. She committed candor, 3 counts of candor in this one statement. And you could feel the Democrat momentum for keeping the House just sort of deflating right when she said that. So I support this bill, but I heard something earlier, and I want to give Mr. Westerman a chance to respond to the mischaracterization, I believe, of his logic. There was somebody on the other side of the aisle, won't say who, today, said that, Mr. Westerman, that your plan was that China pollutes, so we should too. Is that what we're proposing here? And can you talk about the consequence of just relying on China for everything that we consume?
Well, thank you, Mr. Massie, for giving me a chance to clarify. When I heard that, it reminded me of what Reagan used to say, that our colleagues across the aisle aren't necessarily trying not to tell the truth. They just know so much about what isn't so. And that's a classic example of that. We do things cleaner, safer, more efficiently with no human rights violations here in the U.S. China doesn't do that. If we don't produce it here, it's got to come from somewhere. And this not in my backyard policy is going to create the demand where we're buying more from China, where we're buying more from OPEC, where Russia's got more markets globally. And also the argument's been made, and you very well explained what's happening with inflation, but something that hasn't been brought out today is the cost of food. Food prices have gone through the roof, more so than even energy prices in places. You might ask, what does energy have to do with food? But this idea that we can't export our natural gas because it'll cause natural gas prices to go up in the U.S. Well, the number one ingredient in agriculture is fertilizer. The number one ingredient in fertilizer is natural gas. Actually, it's roughly so that the price per ton of ammonium nitrate is about 20 times the price per MCF of gas. Because we can't export gas, there are different markets for gas around the world. It's not like a global commodity that everybody's paying the same. Gas prices in Europe are up as much as 6 to 10 times more than gas prices here. Fertilizer is a global commodity. So when gas prices go up in Europe and fertilizer prices go up, even though the gas prices are here in the U.S., the global fertilizer market is high, which drives the cost of food up. So you can't just look at this in a vacuum and say we can't export our gas because it might make our gas prices go up. By exporting our gas, we can lower the cost of fertilizer. Actually, exporting fertilizer made here in the United States is basically the same thing as exporting gas. So our bill, again, does not do away with any of the bedrock environmental laws. It looks at putting U.S. producers and U.S. gas and our best interest at heart first and foremost. The NEPA revisions in our bill, if you go through a NEPA analysis, there's 3 ways you can approach it. You can do a categorical exclusion, you can do an environmental assessment, or you can do an environmental impact statement. Our bill changes nothing. It doesn't add any new categorical exclusions. It doesn't change anything about an environmental assessment. It doesn't change anything about an environmental impact statement. What it does, it says you have to do that in a timely manner. It puts sideboards on it. It puts one agency in charge of the permitting so that you've not got multiple agencies holding up progress. It says we're going to go through the environmental permitting. We're going to do it the same way we've always done it. We're just going to do it in a manner that is expedient so that we can actually do these projects, whether they're oil and gas or wind or energy or even forestry management and navigable waterways, ports, highways, all the money that our colleagues put in the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, they can't spend that either because they can't permit highways and bridges and navigable waterways and ports. This NEPA revision will help our whole economy and help us to do things much better and protect those bedrock environmental laws that we've heard so much about, even though you adequately describe them as magma environmental laws.
Yes, beach
Bedrock
sand.
on fire.
Yeah, or magma. They are definitely not bedrock environmental laws. They shift every time you look at them, and it's particularly when there's a new election. Before I yield back, I just want to talk about hydrofluoric acid, which is used in a refinery process, ironically, to make cleaner burning gasoline and to get more out of a barrel of oil. Like the more pressure you put on these other regulations about how clean a motor must burn the gasoline, or who can get a permit to extract the oil from the ground, there's going to be more pressure to use hydrofluoric acid. People don't willingly bring this into a refinery. It's one of the most efficient tools we have for cracking molecules. And so but I also want to point out it's used in semiconductors and it's used in pharmaceuticals. Two things, if we were to ban hydrofluoric acid, we not only would we have a hard time refining oil to make it cleaner burning and to get more from a barrel of oil, we'd also run more of our pharmaceutical industry out of the country and more of the semiconductor industry out of the country. So I think it's dangerous to take one chemical and molecule and just say it's bad. So with that, I will yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. Chair.